Greetings, lords and ladies. You might have caught wind of the fact that Sven Vinko was on a stream with Co-Carnage the other night, and he talked about a bunch of things. But to my mind, the most important thing he talked about was what sort of origin character you should be playing, or perhaps better put, what sort of character you should not be playing for your very first run. Because if you think about it, your very first run is extremely consequential. It's your very first experience. You'll never ever be able to replicate that again. It's going to be the experience in the game that offers you the most surprises. It's going to be the experience of the game which potentially might be the most frustrating. And in many ways, it could be the experience in the game that offers you the most satisfaction. And when asked about the DarkUrge specifically, Sven was very careful to say that he wouldn't recommend it to new players. And he also further recommended that you not play an origin character for your first playthrough. All this with the caveat that yes, he acknowledges people will do this regardless, and you can still have a good time, but he recommends a personally tailored tab, i.e. your own created character with your own personal backstory, rather than the DarkUrge or any of the origin characters. And why would he say this? Well, some of this you can take directly from his own lips, but a lot of this you have to extrapolate from his statements. For example, the DarkUrge always pushes you in a very specific direction. It nudges you, to put it mildly, and sometimes drags you down a certain path. And the way Sven was putting it, the implication was that if you create your own character, that is sort of the base game experience. To experience the whole story in a wholesome, non-intrusive way, without any in-game biases that are going to pull you in one direction or the other. And that makes sense. Tab is good because in many ways, you can create your own personal role-playing backstory for your character. You're not wedded to a particular background, and your story is absolutely completely open. Good, bad, somewhere in between, sneaky, dishonest, honest, upright, sincere, whatever it is, whatever choices you make, those will be your own. The same couldn't be said for the DarkUrge. Now, it is true that people such as Fexture Life have claimed that the DarkUrge is just Tab plus, and there's no reason not to play it, but based on what Sven has said, that's really not the case. The DarkUrge, as I've said before, is a very dark path, but on top of that, there's just too many unknowns in a first playthrough. So if you go down the path of the DarkUrge, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do, then you might end up in a situation you could potentially regret. Whereas the Tab character is your own, it's free, it's your own creation, and every decision you make is your own, and you still get to experience the greater story. Ultimately, in order to describe the difference between a DarkUrge run and a Tab original character run, I would say the following. If you play the DarkUrge, there are two paths available to you. The path of giving in to the temptations, the urges, i.e. being the DarkUrge, and whatever that entails, or resisting that path. And we don't know all the details about resistance, how effective it is, or even if it's entirely possible to the point where you completely resist every urge you have. That seems unlikely. Versus Tab, where you are your own person, you're not preordained to do anything. The DarkUrge is basically resist the DarkUrge or become one with it. And that is not your own character at the end of the day. Now, why would he caution against the origin characters on top of playing the DarkUrge? Well, what he said, and what could further be implied, was that it's better to experience the origin characters after you know their origin. So when you're dealing with their story, you know how to handle it better. So we know a little bit about Astorian, for example, that he's a vampire spawn, that he has a vampire lord master called Cazador, and that he's a Baldurian, but not much beyond that. Now, I have seriously considered, and still am considering, playing Astorian for my very first playthrough. Namely because I don't like him very much, and I thought if I play him as an origin character, I won't need to listen to his obnoxious voice, and I can steer him in the direction I want him to go in. But you could obviously make an argument that that's an inauthentic Astorian, because Astorian is supposed to sound that way, he's supposed to be over the top, obnoxious, etc., etc. That's the way he's meant to be experienced. And so that raises the question, if you do an origin character blindly, without knowing how they're supposed to quote-unquote behave, then you're sort of creating your own headcanon. Whereas if you know how the story develops, then you might, when you're playing that origin character, try to tailor your decisions more along those lines, as opposed to going in completely blind. And having listened to Sven, he really put me on the fence. I initially was going to do the DarkUrge, but there are just too many unknowns involved in the DarkUrge. I absolutely will do at least 2 DarkUrge playthroughs, one good, one evil, but I don't know what it takes to resist the DarkUrge, or even if it's possible to fully resist the DarkUrge in its totality. So I would prefer to know the story better before that. However, origin characters represent a nice compromise. They do have a backstory, they do have a tale to tell, but it's not necessarily this overwhelming force of murder. There's more nuance. In short, I don't believe that origin characters will be locked into this either-or situation that the DarkUrge almost certainly will be locked into. There's going to be more nuance, more subtlety, and there's probably more than two choices, ultimately, whatever origin you choose. And so at the moment I'm currently vacillating between creating a Tav and an origin character, probably Astorian. The Tav character just has so many advantages. Now I won't be calling my character Tav, but you know what I mean. You can create your own race, your own gender, your own abilities, your own class, your own look, everything. And that's really what people want, and ideally that's what I want too. But I do have the fear that the Tav experience could be a little bit bland, in contrast to the origin characters. Even though I have no way to know that, that's a sneaking suspicion that I do have. So in summary, based on all the information we've accumulated thus far, the DarkUrge is not Tav Plus. It is a fundamentally different experience according to Sven, and is probably not recommended for the first run. The origin characters also, according to Sven, are not recommended for the first run, because you would be playing them blindly, and he recommends that you know a little bit about their backstory so as to know how to act them properly, because you want to be in character. And your own character, the Tav character, is the most authentic, personalized experience you can have, which is why he recommends that most people go down that route, and I myself am heavily leaning in that direction, even though I might end up doing a blind run on Astorian as well. But before asking you guys what you think, I think there's actually a counter-argument, at least partly, to what Sven is saying. Specifically with respect to the origin characters. Yes, once you've done a proper playthrough, then you know what their origins are, how they behave, what their attitudes are, and how their story might end. But at the same time, playing them blindly means that you might feel less constrained, less inclined to rigidly adhere to some sort of stereotype that you've gotten used to due to your previous playthrough. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do it that way if you play an origin character. However, I want you to imagine Lae'zel as a kind and caring person. That would be completely out of character for her, at least in the initial stages of the game if you played early access. And so, if you don't know most of the details of the character, it might be more interesting, because you're essentially playing an origin character, you're learning about their origin on the go, which I think could make for a very tempting, interesting, and intriguing playthrough. Of course, everything I've said about origin characters equally applies to DarkUrge in many ways. If, for example, you want to have a playthrough where you're shocked, surprised, and you want the challenge of having to deal with this either-or path, then the DarkUrge is probably the path for you. Or you follow Sven's advice and you just make a Tav. So after hearing this, what exactly are your plans? Are you going to be doing a Tav, a DarkUrge? Going to be playing an origin character? What's most appealing to you? Do let me know in the comment section. And before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord server where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3 with like-minded people, as well as other RPGs. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you can be notified of my videos. It'd be much appreciated as it really helps out channel growth. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.